Hey everyone, I'm so grateful that you're here for another Soul Killer Life class with a beautiful new guest today, Alan P. Hill, and I will be inviting you on. 1 second, I'm gonna look for you and see if I can send you an invitation. Let me check, yes.
Oops, wrong camera, hold on. All right, how's that?
Great. Hi, Ellen. Thanks so much for being here. It might be helpful to mute the speakers of your.
Yep, just figured that out.
All right.
Thanks. All right, how's this?
So happy that you're here. It's all good now. I hear no echoes. Everything's
Perfect.
fine. Just everybody here hopping on today, watching today, or listening to our podcast. But also people right now hopping on or watching this later on our socials. Just grateful that you're here, sharing your time with us. And if you have any questions that pop up today, or if you feel like sending them afterwards, right now there's a chat box down below, so you can ask anything or share any comments if you feel like that. So please do so. I love any questions. No questions are wrong or weird. I mean, it's a great thing to ask your questions, so I'm grateful if you do so. And yes, just to start, I'd love to welcome you, Ellen, here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us too. And
My pleasure.
I to let people know that today's topic is how to invest in property to create wealth in a way that you can maximize your cash flow and do that without risking it all.
Right.
And I love that topic. I'm grateful for you sharing your expertise with us these coming the coming hour. And I'd love to give you a bit of a warm welcome and let people know, from the heart, like what it is that I understand you do. But if I leave out anything, I'll ask afterwards to add things if I missed out. So
Sure.
what I understand and what I know you from is being a beautiful soul, sharing some really realness, rawness in your own journey, and you're a father and a husband to a beautiful wife, and then next to that, you're also a speaker, like an international speaker, training people on all across the globe. I mean, in over 22 countries,
Right.
I believe.
Yes, that's right.
You've shared the stage or trained with or for several global thought leaders that people might know. One of them, Tony Robbins, Robert Kiyosaki. You've been working with this beautiful seminar. How do you say that? The biggest one in the world, the seminar business called Success.
That's right, yes. With a Millionaire Mind Intensive, yes.
Yes, and then also T. Harv Eker, Blair Singer, many other names. But I think what touched me the most in seeing you doing your work and being able to connect with you is the big heart there. And
Thank you.
I'm really grateful that you step up and share your story here. I know you've been through some bumps in the road yourself.
Yes.
As probably many of us all have. Did I leave out anything here? And maybe you'd like to add something?
No, thank you very much for that, Feline. Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for being here, for having me, for inviting me to participate and to share with your followers. So, yeah, I mean, you've covered a lot of bases there. Obviously, as you said, I've got a beautiful wife, Barbara, two amazing baby boys, now growing fast, a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old, and I live here in the south of Portugal, in the Algarve. which we're really happy about. I've been here for a couple of years and just moved into our new home here. As you said, I've got a background in international training and speaking. A big shout out to one of my mentors there, Blair Singer, who's really taught me how to do what I do. I know we've have a mutual connection there, I've really had, for the last almost 20 years, my background has been in business and in finance and in property, and that's really kind of what's allowed me to create passive income and to be able to share how to do that with others that are ready and willing to do that. And so these days, what I spend most of my time doing is helping other entrepreneurs or successful people to make the most of their money investing in property, which is part of the reason I'm here today, is just to obviously share that perspective with other people from a very real practical perspective, just to look at how can I create the freedom in my life from a financial perspective, but obviously dovetailing in with what you like to talk about, and taking care of your mind and your body and your soul, and all of that as well. So so that's kind of a good bit of a summary. I love traveling, and a few years ago went all the way around the world and toured 27 countries in 23 months with my wife. We went on a big trip. That was an amazing experience, and we had that opportunity because of the freedoms that have been created through business and property. And obviously now living here in southern Portugal is a lifestyle choice that we have made, and we're blessed to be able to make that and still to be connecting with people all over the world. Today I'm with you in the Netherlands. Yesterday I was with someone from Hawaii, the day before from Singapore, prior to that last week in Dubai, UK. So we've got all these international connections, and we have this amazing technology now to be able to do and work from wherever we wish. And so that's where I am right now, and that I can say honestly I'm very blessed and grateful for everything that's all the opportunities that I've been able to take advantage of. So that's where I am right now, but as you said, it's not all been smooth sailing in my life, and I've had some road bumps along the way, but I'll pause there and just check back in with you in case you want to take things where you want to take them.
Thank you so much, Alan, for adding the most important part, connecting today's talk and your background and the things you're an expert at. Just repeating for people that hopped on just now, today's topic is how to invest in property to create wealth for yourselves and your loved ones, and maximize cash flow without risking it all. And I think you are the expert to do that, now that you've even shared how many years you've been doing this and the lifestyle choices you're able to make since doing that. I believe that many of our listeners, but also viewers today, do experience, probably one dream or one wish that comes close to a lifestyle like that. So I'm just so grateful that you share that with us. And for everybody hopping on just now, feel free to ask any questions or type anything in the chat box below. You're so welcome to do that. And yes, I'd love to dive in with you, Alan, on what you just shared, maybe a bit on today's topic. You've already shared why this is important and what it helps you do nowadays, but I'd love to kind of dive into how did your journey come to this point where you feel like standing up, being a teacher and a leader, especially in this topic.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Feline. So, yeah, I'll come to the road bumps. I think probably is the best thing to do. A lot of people you'll see online, especially Instagram, Facebook. It's all the kind of shiny side of life, isn't it, with Instagram and Facebook quite often. And that's, it's not necessarily people being fake. It's just something, I want to show you this. I'm excited about that. But I think it's also important to show both sides of the coin, and to help people to understand the challenges and the struggles that come along the way. And for me, there have been two road bumps, as it were. There have been lots, but two key ones that I should mention, really. And in context of this, prior to starting my property investment journey, I was living at home with my family. I'd just graduated university, and life was pretty simple, and I was quite happy, and life was pretty light and light-hearted and easy. And then we were hit by a tragedy in our family household. There was a fire that destroyed our family home, and we lost everything. All of our possessions, our family heirlooms, photographs, everything like that. And the real tragedy was that my dear mum, who is the cornerstone of my life, my family life, she didn't make it out. So, in the couple of years that it took really to kind of start to get back on my feet from that, I did some thinking, and I realized that, I couldn't choose the cards that life had given to me, but I realized I could choose how to play those cards. And so I made a decision. I decided I'm going to rise up and treat this like a test, and I'm going to honor the life and death of my mum in a different way, and I'm going to do things differently. Like, what would Alan now do that Alan before wouldn't have given himself permission to do? And so then I started being bolder, and I started in business and investing in property, and I went out, I became a pilot. I wanted to do things that I thought old Alan would never have done, exciting things that I could say, well, look, my mum passed away, I can't change that, but at least I responded to that in a way that she'd be proud, and I would honour her memory. So that was a big decision that I made in terms of how I got to where I am now. A large part of why I want to share this journey is because of that too, because it's really an honour of the memory of my mum to say, look, I might not even have been standing on stage and sharing this with people had that not happened, or even if I would, now I can do it and let people know how I managed to recover from a massive setback, and hopefully inspire and encourage others when they experience setbacks, that there are people out there who've been through setbacks as well. And look, it doesn't necessarily mean your life is over. In fact, it can mean the beginning of a new chapter. And so for the number of people that I tell this story to, which has now been actually tens of thousands of people around the world, in all of these different countries that I've spoken to, not all at once obviously, a couple of thousand here, a couple of hundred there, but the way I see it is each person that just gets a little glimmer of hope or a little bit of positive energy from this story, that's energy, positive energy that's out there in the world that wouldn't have been out there were it not for this to have happened. And so that's a way of me reconciling that unfortunate and extremely sad tragedy that happened to us. So that's kind of something about my journey now, and on that journey of personal development, as I was figuring things out afterwards, I discovered my personal mission. And is it okay if I share that with you?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So my personal mission is to love, serve and inspire the greatest number of people in the greatest possible way. And I do so in exchange for exciting financial rewards, so I can raise the quality of life for myself and others and enjoy the adventure of life. And so that's why I can say honestly, from my heart to yours and to everybody that's watching, to those that are listening later, it's truly an honour and a pleasure to be here today to serve you and to share with you, given the background of what I've just shared, of why I'm doing all of this, and why my life is different now and how I responded to it. So, hopefully you guys are pumped about being here, you're excited about it. If you are, let us know in the chat, and we're really glad to have you with us. So that's the first big road bump. I'll just pass back over to you, Feline. I'm happy to move on, but I want to make sure we've got some conversation here.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you for your realness there, and
yeah,
taking people along with you. I love how humble and really honest you do that, and I think so many people can relate to this. And we all have our own types of setbacks, and yes, of course it can be so detrimental and putting you down or setting you back for a long time, but yeah, there's always as long as people are standing up, once you found ways to work with it really, or go through it, you can really make new decisions and start new chapters, just like you said it. I love how you put it.
Thank you.
And yes, I'm just yeah, I'm amazed, and I feel connected. I've had my own types of setbacks there when it came to health, but also my dear family members going through health issues, or
Yeah.
you know, and yes, there are some serious setbacks every now and then in life, and for some that's earlier in life, and for some that's later
That's
on.
right. Yeah.
And it
That's
really
right.
doesn't. It really doesn't really matter when, or the most important thing is the how. Can you transform that into new chapters, just like you said? I thank you for touching base on that too. And then you made these new decisions. You walked the path. You took yourself. It sounds like you kind of, in honor of your dear mother, you, well, maybe thanks to her in that way, you were able to be more bold, more
Yeah.
think bigger, dream
Yeah.
bigger,
Yeah.
stand up who you are.
Absolutely. I think in a way it's about giving yourself permission. So, if we take one, I mean, we'll get into some property specific stuff here, but if you're talking about, taking bold steps, investing in property is a bold step, moving to a new country is a bold step, changing your job, if that's what you're in at the moment, is a bold step, starting a business. So, for me, I found that this challenge that had happened was a great excuse for me to give myself permission to do things that the old, more sensible Alan might not have done. That doesn't mean that I went crazy and went and spent all my money in Vegas or anything like that. But from my perspective, old Alan, it was a bit like that, like going out and becoming a pilot. I mean, that was a wonderful adventure, wonderful experience, I should say. But, the old Alan would have said, well, why would you spend that money unless you're going to become a career pilot, and then it's an investment? I understand that. So this new Alan said, I've worked hard, I've earned some money, I deserve to reward myself, and I've got this dream. And for me, I'm here. And I just saw pilots as kind of those guys up there, like they're way above me, like, wow, like with awe about them. And so I just thought, well, if I could go from here to there, that would make me a different person. I'd be one of those guys, a pilot. And, now once I've done it, I kind of, it feels very normal. But other people, I'm sure, sort of think, gosh, a pilot, wow. And so that's, again, an encouragement and inspiration. I hope to other people that you can sometimes just give yourself permission to do things that will make you happy, regardless of whether or not they seem to be, just for your, it doesn't all have to be about money and career. So in light of the fact that we're talking about property in a moment here, and that the bulk of the reason why people talk about property is as an investment class and an asset to help produce an income and to help create stability, security, and all of that stuff that a lot of people desire, that it's really a money thing with property. Property is very closely connected with money. But that does bring me on to the other road bump that I talked about, which is just over 2 years ago on Christmas Eve. I started getting sick and I didn't know why, and I was vomiting like repeatedly, couldn't stop it. And long story short, I went to hospital. Doctor sent me straight there, and it was, they didn't know what it was, and they told me they'd done a quick scan and found something on my brain and thought I had brain cancer, or worse, cancer of the body that had spread to the brain, and they just discovered it. And so that was pretty scary. And 5 days sitting in hospital, being extremely sick, and not being able to hold any food down and not knowing what was going on, that was a pretty dark time. And yet off the back of what had happened previously, I kind of had some tools and knew how to handle it. And so I was kind of back in familiar territory in a way. It was very different because this was me and my life. And I had at that time just one son. And I was thinking, am I going to get to know him? Do I need to record videos so he knows who I am and when he grows up, who his dad was? So these were the thoughts that were going around my mind. And so the reason I bring that up now in relation to what I was talking about, money and investment, is that there are some things far important than money, but that doesn't mean that money isn't important and that looking after yourself is not important. From time immemorial, we as humans have needed to gather resources to support our physical and mental, emotional beings. You know, back in the day, we would go out and invest our time gathering firewood and putting it in the cave, let's say. And now we've got some resources to use to keep ourselves warm. And so essentially property investing is like saying, I've got some resource, it might be time or it might be money, and I'm going to invest it so that I've got something for later to look after myself and give my family some warmth, stability, a roof over the head, and all of those things. So really, it's just a kind of very basic human need to provide, you know, all of the basics, and to have the feeling that everything's going to be okay because you can do that and you have the means to do that. So that when I talk about money, it's not just cold hard numbers. There's a reason behind it. And, you know, being ill in hospital, I realized that that wasn't the only reason I was here, and I wanted to make sure, you know, it reminded me, I mean, I knew already, I think, inside, but it reminded me of the importance of making sure that I could enjoy the moments with my family, because you just never know how long we're going to be here for. You know, any one of us could get taken out in a traffic accident, and then suddenly life is over and we don't, you know, a chance to reflect and think, oh, I better do a video for my son who doesn't know me. So there's a lot of deep stuff in there, but the point is really is just to say, you know, the context of all of this, given the kind of theme of your podcast and who you like to speak to and how you like to reach out, I just thought that would be useful to kind of set the scene before we dive into some sort of what otherwise might be seen as kind of cold hard numbers and facts and figures and stuff like that.
I love it. Thank you for doing that, Alan, because, you know, I love how you open up. You know, of course, I'm so sorry to hear what you've been through, and when it comes to our own health at some point in life not being something you can rely on as you previously somewhat took for granted sometimes. Then we are confronted with, well, I speak from experience in that sense, you know, at some point not being able to walk or see or you know, so I connect with you there. Like, then we suddenly face some of our own fears for death, fears on future, fears on things that, you know, when it comes to our dear family members or parents or others going through illness, it's a different perspective than when you go through it yourself, and especially. And so I'm so grateful that you touch on that, because especially when it comes to money or investing, what you touch on right now, the depth of it is, it's all about fears sometimes. And I know that for many people, money is a topic, you know, maybe a bit in the woo-woo scene. I believe that when it comes to energies, money is also just an energy, and it's the way you deal with or have a relationship with it, as you have relationships with people or things in your life materially. So goes the same for your relationship with money. And I even believe that the root chakra, if it goes to our energy system, our body being an energy system, the root chakra is the one that is all about money, and then it comes back to safety and security. So when people and listeners today or viewing this, when people are allowing themselves to invest either in property or other ways where you can invest, there are so many stocks, NFTs, I think is one thing, typical thing. There are so many beautiful ways to invest, and now we're talking about how to invest in property to create wealth and maximize, you know, your cash flow without risking it. And I'm grateful that you shared or kind of touch base on how you can go from fears or, you know, experience them and then still dare or allow yourself to invest to create that freedom on some levels, especially to take care of yourself in that way as well. It's a form of self-care, to make sure you have enough cash flow so you can handle episodes or you know, chapters in your life like you've just mentioned. Yeah,
absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And you know, as I said, you know, money is really just a representation, or it's a resource, and, you know, and you, like you said, it is energy. If you just go to its very basic form, back in the day, we might be farmers, and if you spent an extra 2 hours out, you know, gathering fruit, veg, nuts, or whatever, you've got some extra resource. If someone else didn't, you've spent some extra energy to get something that will help you later and maybe might come in very useful. So money is just the same, really. It's just a way of, you know, but I guess the analogy here when we talk about investing is taking things that you could, let's say, eat, you know, consume now, and instead of eating it, setting some aside to plant it and wait a lot of time, tend for it, care for it, and wait for it to grow, to continue producing for you and your children in the future. That's a kind of an analogy there that we can use. So absolutely, and yeah, I'm happy to kind of, you know, dive into the topic at hand if you'd like, and, you know, sort of get into what is wealth and cash flow and, you know, risk and all of these things that some people might sort of wonder, well, I don't really know anything about this. You know, what is that all about? So I'm happy to sort of do that, you know, and get there now if you'd like.
Yes, let's do that. Yes, and while you're opening that, I'm just gonna welcome people that hopped on today. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Yosina. Thank you, Paul. Here's Sue saying, super proud of my company. Well, Ellen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, great to see you guys that are on there. I saw Duncan, Paul, Sue. So all of you, you know, sorry if we don't get to mention all of you, but thanks for hopping on, and you know, nice to see your name pop up there. So yeah, so I'm getting on to the topic of how to invest in property, create wealth, and maximize cash flow without risking it all. You know, there's a couple of different bits there, isn't there? There's the investing in property bit, there's creating wealth bit, there's maximizing cash flow bit, and there's the risk bit. So, you know, if we just kind of very briefly just touch on those things. So investing, basically, we're taking some cash and we're putting it in something to grow, you know, in some way, shape or form, our return. And that could be from cash flow or capital growth. And so that kind of is something that's really important to distinguish, particularly in property, which is that some people just think you buy a house for 100,000 whatever, euro, dollars, whatever, pounds, and later on it will be worth 200,000, and that's why you invest. And certainly there are some people that have that as their primary focus, and that's called a capital growth strategy. Whereas others will buy a property and they will do it to produce an income, essentially like a, you know, if you're wanting to retire, you've got a big retirement pot, you might put it into a property and now you live off the rental income, for example. So we've got an income element and a capital growth element. And so when we talk about investing to create wealth and maximize cash flow, it's just the two sides of the ways, two different methods of producing for yourself. And wealth is, we won't get too technical here, but it's to do with your balance sheet or your net worth. And essentially a very basic description of your net worth is how much stuff have you got here and how much stuff do you owe other people here. So if you've got, you know, £10,000 in your bank, but you owe the credit card company £2,000, your overall wealth is 8, because you've got 10,000 here, but you owe someone 2. So once you've paid that 2, you've really got 8 left. So that's really your net worth. So if you've got a property that's worth 500,000 euros or pounds, and you've got a mortgage against that property of 300, then if you were to sell it, you'd pay off the 300,000 and you'd be left with 200,000 before tax, as in, you know, government probably tax you on that remainder, depending on lots of circumstances. So the point I'm saying is wealth is that net worth position. That's saying, how much resource do I have? Back to the analogy I said earlier, you know, it might be like, you know, how many nuts have I managed to store into the corner of my cave? You know, how much stuff have I got that if I wanted to, I could use it? But in property, it's not very liquid. That means it takes a while, at least usually 3 to 4 months to sell, to release the cash back to you. So it's kind of like putting your money away and locking yourself away from being able to spend it, but it grows whilst you're doing it. So that's the wealth element. That's your balance sheet or your net worth. But on the other side, there's the cash flow, and that talks about the monthly day-to-day movement of money. So we're talking about money in and money out. So when we talk about cash flow, if you buy a property with no debt, you just buy it, put the cash in, you spend 100,000 euros, pounds, dollars, whatever, and buy a house, and you've got no debt against it, and then someone's paying you rent of, I don't know, let's say £1,000 a month, just to make the figures easy, then that is your income and that's your cash flow, and you get that every month that they're paying rent. Of course, you've got to make some calculations and allowances, and you might say, well, there's some deductions I need to make for insurance, and what if they don't pay rent? And I would say, well, you can get insurance for that as well, actually. So a lot of people concerned about risk in property, that's one way of mitigating it with insurance. Of course, you wouldn't then get a whole £1,000. You might get, 950 a month, but at least you're insured for the possible risk that somebody doesn't pay you. So your income is more solid. So that's the income side. And some people like to focus on one, and they're often usually thinking about the future when they're talking about their net worth or their balance sheet. And other people who are thinking about cash flow are often more thinking about the now. And when I say now, I mean the kind of the this month to next month, the day to day, the week to week, the month to month now, not now right this second, but the kind of what will I do in my coming weeks and months. So that's where the cash flow bit comes in. So what I like to do in property is focus on the cash flow for a couple of reasons. One is that it helps you to be able to choose to have a lifestyle if you want. If you don't need to spend it because you're earning money elsewhere, it gives you a backup, which helps you to reduce your personal risk of losing a job or a downturn or something like that. So having cash flow reduces risk, but also it helps provide opportunities, and also it creates a pension income for you. You can just start paying it early or not. That's entirely up to you. So you've got the wealth or net worth and the cash flow. So when we talk about property investing, I like to focus on creating cash flow because that helps minimize your risk. Usually people buy property with debt, i.e. a mortgage, because they don't have all of the money in one go. But even if you did, if you had £100,000, let's say, you could buy one property for 100,000, or you could use that as a deposit to buy a 400,000 or 500,000 euro or pound property, and then you've got a higher level of income and a higher level of capital growth. There's a whole bunch of maths that goes behind this, but I'll keep that off the table for just now and just say that we're talking, remember, about the capital growth, about the net worth perspective and the cash flow perspective, and just to kind of understand that there's this interplay between the two, and really that cash flow creates kind of money for the now, and capital growth creates money usually for later release or use, and growing that can be done at the same time as growing that, so the wealth can grow together with the cash flow. And actually in property, most of the money that you'll make, if you do it right, can come from capital growth, even if you're doing cash flow as your primary strategy to reduce your risk. So that's kind of investing in property, wealth or net worth, cash flow or income is another way of putting it, and then risk is the last part that I wanted to touch on before I bounce it back to you, and to say, well, a lot of people have fear, as you touched on earlier, about money, fear of what if I don't have enough. For example, that's a big fear. And also some people have greed. I mean, those are the two basic human emotions that drive us to go away from something which we fear or towards something that we want. And so I'm not adding any judgment that fear is bad or greed is bad. It's just a human emotion that we experience. I'm afraid of that, I'll try to avoid that. Or I want that, I'll get that. That's the two basic human emotions. And so when we talk about risk, some people fear would stop them making an investment that would actually provide for their family. And the fear can usually be mitigated. And how I do that when I work with my clients, because I help successful entrepreneurs invest in property, I charge a fee, but I work for them. Whereas an estate agent works for the seller. So I help people find high return investment properties and help them create a good return. And so that's what I do. And so I talk about risk and I say, well, there's a few different ways we can mitigate risk. And it's logic, it's data, and it's maths. So that's the way I work. But essentially what we're saying is a lot of fears can be handled if you just explore them. So that fear of, oh, I don't want to be up in the middle of night, it's Saturday, 12 o'clock, someone rings me and their toilet's blocked. Well, but if you get a letting agent to manage your property, who's a good one, you'll never hear from the tenants. My wife has a letting agency, and the tenants never speak to the landlord. They don't have his phone number, or their phone numbers are the landlords that she works with. So that's a fear you can mitigate. Another fear, like I talked about earlier, what if they don't pay the rent? Well, you can get insurance for that. You'll lose a bit of your income, a little bit, because you're paying for insurance, but you kind of take the risk out of it. So there's a number of things that you can do with logic or data or maths to kind of mitigate those fears. And then you're left with just that hazy sense of, right, I've covered off the risk of no rent. I've covered off the worry about being up in the middle of the night. and all of the other lists that you might write down that I would go through with my clients, and you're just left with what's left, which is just the basic raw human emotion. If there's a bit of a fuzzy feeling of discomfort, I'm moving outside of my comfort zone, I'm a little bit afraid, and that portion of fear that we haven't been able to mitigate with data, maths or logic, that's the bit that's left where I say that famous phrase of feel the fear and do it anyway applies to that, but not to all the other stuff. You shouldn't just get into property and be like, oh, I'm scared, but it'll be fine. That's not wise. What is wise is to educate yourself, learn, and if you need the help of someone like myself or a book or a coach, then take that on board and study so that you minimize the risk by logic, data, and maths. You find out what you need to do to protect yourself, and then you won't have any fears that you can't take care of. You'll only be left with the ones that you can't. Like, well, I don't know, what if something goes wrong that I haven't thought about? Yes. So feel that fear and do it anyway. So that's the kind of, topic today, without getting too much technical, but I'll just pause there and let you jump in if you have any comments, questions, or if anyone else who's on the chat wants to ask or say anything.
Thanks so much, Alan, for this rich amount of information and saying it so beautifully. I'm just grateful for you doing that, and I made some sort of summary here. I don't feel that it's necessary to really repeat everything because I thought you were so clear. What I do love to give some extra time for you in a bit to maybe zoom in on some of these topics that you feel could be helpful. What I just feel like sharing is just welcoming ondernemen op slippers. Odette, Asher, Lala Lupa. There were some extra people coming on and just giving away. So thanks for that. Grateful that you're here, and also people listening. I feel everything's fine. You're doing amazing, and I just repeating how you've shared those two different strategies and how they actually go together, the capital growth strategy and the wealth and the cash flow strategy.
Yes.
How you would suggest to focus on the cash flow, and then at the same time you're actually also building the other one.
Yes, that's right. Well, if you take care to study and make sure that you know what you're doing, you can't know what you're doing to start with. So you've got to either allow the expense of mistakes or allow the expense of education, and either one is okay. I'm not here to say, hey, you've got to work with someone like myself. A lot of people that are successful in business realize that they'll say, I'd rather have a fixed and known cost of work with this guy than necessarily just take their chances out there with what they don't know that they don't know. But to be honest with you, I did take some education. I did spend some money in it, but I also learned from making mistakes as well. So that's a really valuable lesson. So I would say it's, at the very least, if you want to get into investing in any asset class, but it makes sense in property as well, is to talk to other people who've done it before, going to property meetups, networking, and just listening to what people are talking about. And you'll pick up a lot just from listening to what people are worried about, what they're talking about, what they're thinking about. It might seem overwhelming at first if you go to a property meet and there's loads of people there talking stuff that you don't know what it means, but over time you just gradually get into it. It's the same thing as I've been talk about physical stuff and health. I've been doing martial arts since I was 14, a little bit on and off as phases of life has come. Like I did a bit less when I was at university. I've done a bit less with my kids who've been very young, just of late. But essentially that's nearly 30 years of martial arts exercise and training. And if you just show up to a class, you wouldn't expect to know everything straight away. You have to get into a groove and keep coming until you kind of start to develop some strengths in those areas. So I would just say that one massive way to mitigate risk or minimize risk is to educate yourself, and to read about it. I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad's by Robert Kiyosaki. I'd read his second book, Rich Dad Poor Dad 2, The Cashflow Quadrant. Those two books are key to getting started, in my mind, in investing in any asset class, but property is a good one to focus on. And I know Robert Kiyosaki personally. I've had dinner with him many, many times, yeah, he's an incredibly bright guy and is very successful. And I learned from, you know, what he has taught and some of the principles. And so, you know, it's not like I'm here as some expert coming up with brand new ideas. I'm just sharing what people that are successful in property do, including myself and people I work with. So it's not rocket science, really. It's literally just, do you want to make money in property? And if you do, what do you need to do to minimize risk, or get some education for a start, or work with somebody who you know you can trust? So that's part of the without risking it all. But actually, as I said, the premium, you know, sort of focus of minimizing risk is cash flow, because really a property investment is kind of a business. Even if you have a letting agent running it, that's just, you're paying a manager to manage your business for you, and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I recommend that for busy people who don't have experience or know what they're doing. But essentially, you know, the risk element, if you think about it like this, it makes logical sense. If you make more money in a business, by very nature of the fact that you're making more money, you have less risk, because you've got more reserves and resources in which to be able to handle a challenge or a crisis. So some people's fear might be interest rates, they're going up. It's like, well, yes, they are, but there are historical lows. When I started investing in the early 2000s, interest rates were 5 or 6%, and that was just normal, and we started buying and so on. Now interest rates at the Bank of England are record low, from 0.1 up to 0.25, and going up now even more than that, you know. I think they'll probably be putting it up again today, actually, from what I remember. So yeah, it's you know, there are ways to mitigate against those risks as well. You can fix your mortgage for 5 or 10 years, which means that you know exactly what you're paying for the next 10 years on your debt that you have to pay. And so, you know, minimizing risk, there's a number of ways, a number of techniques that you can do it, but maximizing your cash flow is a very straightforward one, and it's a really good one, because not only does it minimize risk, but it also benefits you financially, because you're making more money. So learning how to invest for cash flow, for the maximum cash flow that you can get, is a good way to minimize risk. You know, yeah, so that's really what I have to say about that at this stage. I'm happy to keep going. I just very conscious that you might want to, you know, have a bit of conversation here about this, and you know.
Yes, well, yeah, you can for sure keep going. Grateful just to have you kind of zoom in on some of these points there, and grateful for everybody watching still or listening. And I feel that we still have time, so go ahead.
Good.
Maybe you could go, you know, not only for people for whom this is new material and new information, I'm sure they'd love to know, so what would it look like if I'd be focusing on cash flow? You know, what would be,
yes,
like how do I do that? What does it mean? How do I read it? What are averages that I can expect? But maybe also for people that are a bit further on this journey already, maybe you can add some bits and pieces for that.
Absolutely, I can definitely do that. So, you know, if you're starting out and you're brand new, let's just go there first, then we'll touch on someone who's perhaps already involved and a bit more advanced. So, you know, starting out, basically, when we talk about maximizing your cash flow, you know, you might just sort of say, well, what does that mean? That means getting the most rent, right? Well, not necessarily. So if you think about it, let's just use some very simple maths. If you buy a property, I'm going to use pounds, but you can use this in euros or dollars or whatever your currency is. Let's say you buy a property in the UK for, you know, £100,000. It is possible to buy property for as little as 50 or less £1,000 in some parts of the UK, but the average is, you know, somewhere around the 300,000 mark now. I think I've lost track of that. But anyway, so £100,000 you buy a property, and let's say that the rent is per year, let's say £5,000, then we would call that a yield of 5%. And the yield simply means how much rent as a proportion of the value of the house, which kind of is like saying, if I bought a house with cash for 100,000 and I got 5,000 back each year, then after 20 years, I'd have had £100,000 in cash back. I'd have had my money back, but I still own that property. So that would be a 5% yield. Okay, that's not the same as a return on investment. I'll explain that in a moment. But that example would make you say, okay, that's good. What about this other property over here that's £200,000 and it's making me even more rent? Brilliant. Well, I'll get that one then, won't I? Well, no, check the maths first. Because just because it's more rent, what if it's only £8,000 per year? only, well, it's like, hold on, that's not only, that's £3,000 more, that's more money. And I would say, well, yeah, but hold on a sec. If you bought one house with 5,000, you could have bought rent per year at 100,000. You could have bought two houses at 100,000 and now be having that 5,000 from that and 5,000 from that, which would be £10,000. So then you sort of think, well, hold on a minute, that sounds better than buying one house of 200,000 with only the £8,000 rent, because I'm getting an extra £2,000 over here per year. So that's why yield is important, is because you can turn it into a percentage. Because otherwise, the reality is you'll be looking at a house that's on at 395,000 and trying to compare it to a house that's on at 425,000. And you can't just say because it's cheaper, there'll be less rent. Sometimes a house that's cheaper actually has more rent for some reason. So it's very important to understand the maths, and that's a simple thing to do, is to calculate the yield. You take the annual rent and you divide it by the value of the property, and that gives you your yield. And what that allows you to do is compare property A with property B to see which one is better performing in terms of the rent per pound of property, if that makes sense. Okay, so the ROI, or the return on investment, is separate from the yield, because the ROI is where you talk about, right, well, hold on a minute, how much money will I get back every year for every pound I've actually invested? Because if you think about it, if you buy £100,000 house, you might not use cash. You might put a deposit of, for example, £25,000. And then you might borrow 75 to buy that house on a mortgage. So now you might be paying, I don't know, let's say £2,000 a year in your mortgage costs. So you've got 5,000 coming in, 2,000 going out, and you're only getting 3,000. And you might say, well, why would I do that? I could have had 5,000 if I bought the whole house. I would say, well, hold on, but you only put £25,000 into this deal and you're getting £3,000 back. If you did that 4 times, you'd have invested your £100,000 and you'd have got 3, 3, 3, and 3, which is £12,000 back, instead of putting £100,000 into this property and getting 5. So that shows you that with debt, with mortgage debt, there's the potential to make a lot more money or a lot more ROI. So that's basically a couple of simple distinctions between yield and ROI for those that are new to property. Those are some very important distinctions. And I've just simplified it. It isn't quite that simple, but you at least need to understand that to be able to work out what's good for you. Okay, because debt is a double-edged sword. It can really ramp up your wealth massively with something called leverage, but it can also be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing with it. Just like a sword, or a knife. You don't give a child a knife until they're old enough to understand that it could also hurt them, as well as be a useful tool. So in the same way with mortgage debt, get educated about it like you would with a child with a knife, so you don't accidentally cut yourself. And with a mortgage debt, you could do, you could destroy your financial world and go bankrupt, but also you could do as I've done and grow your wealth and net worth and income very substantially. So that's yield and ROI, and 2 key distinctions to make. And then I'll just touch in a moment, if you want to jump in you can, but I'll just touch in a moment now on a slightly more advanced strategy of, what does it actually mean to get more money? How do I get more money, right? Does that sound like an interesting thing to answer?
Yes, sure thing. Go ahead.
Okay. So for example, now this is not necessarily that advanced. For me, it just seems normal. But for somebody who's brand new to property, it's considered perhaps a more advanced technique than what would be considered a normal or vanilla investment strategy. So a vanilla investment strategy, you buy a house, like I just said, you rent it out to a family, job done. Okay. If you buy that same house, and it's, let's say, a 4 or 5 bedroom house, and you rent out the bedrooms to young professionals or students, usually you'll make a bit more money because you're renting out the bedrooms, and it's kind of like, it's like you're buying a block of flats with 5 or 6 different apartments in it, but you're buying a house with 5 or 6 different bedrooms. Now that actually minimizes risk as well as increases your income for 2 reasons. It minimizes risk for the reason I said earlier, because of the extra money that I'll come to in a minute, but it also minimizes it because if you've got 5, 6 people in a house and one of them doesn't pay their rent, you've still got 5/6 of your income. You've still got, all of these guys paying rent, but this guy isn't. So you're still covering your mortgage. You haven't got any risk. Even if 2 don't pay, you're usually still covering your mortgage. So that's one of the reasons why it helps minimize risk, having the multi-let strategy, or house in multiple occupation, a HMO strategy. Okay, now this doesn't work in every location, in every town. You need to do a little bit of research to sort of check where the demand is, but that's one way of minimizing risk, is by having several people paying one mortgage essentially, and they're paying their share of the mortgage, rather than one guy or family or lady that could lose their job and suddenly say, I can't afford to pay it. So that's one part of this strategy, of the HMO, or house and multiple occupancy strategy. The other part of it is the extra cash flow that you get by renting the rooms out. You do need to know what you're doing. There are laws and regulations around it, but you can find that out, you can study it, you can read books and so on, and with that study that you'll make, you'll then learn how to do it safely. If you want to do it with a letting agent, you'll be paying the money to them every month. It could be anything from 10 to some cases 20% of your income to the letting agent to manage it for you. But that does de-risk you an awful lot, because they know what they're doing, or they should do. Not everyone does. Some letting agents are terrible, which is why my wife set up her business, because we were so disgusted by some of the practices out there. So we said, let's set up a business. My wife did, as we're landlords, so we'll set this up for other landlords. So anyway, the point I'm saying here of this strategy is that, one way of getting extra income is by finding a bigger house and renting out the rooms. Another way of increasing your cash flow in buying in property can be choosing an area where, remember we talked about the yield, where you buy £100,000 house and you get 5,000 rent, or a £200,000 house with 8,000 rent, for example, and you work out the yield and you say, right, that £200,000 house, if I work out the yield, well, let's just do the maths on that, cut it in half. I've got 100,000, and that half of the house is producing 4,000 in rent. So I know that really that's 4% yield. So that's not as good as the other one that I was looking at. So you can choose like that. But when you come to, there's another way of looking at it as well, is you could say, well, what if I'm buying for the same rental income? Let's say I've got house A with 5,000 and house B with 5,000. House A costs 100 to buy, but house B only costs 60 to buy. Then you just say, well, this is pretty intuitive now. You're probably thinking to yourself, well, of course, if I'm only spending 60,000 to purchase that income of 5, that's better than having to spend all that much money of 100,000 to get the same annual income. So clearly this kind of is where the yield helps again, because the yield will tell you which one is better. And so that brings me to this perhaps less advanced point than the HMO one of how to make more money through, how to increase your cash flow, is if you're focused on cash flow, you can choose to buy properties where the prices of the properties are cheaper and the rents are a bit cheaper, but maybe not as much. So you might buy a house that's half the price of the more expensive place, but the rent isn't half, the rent's a bit more than half. So you're actually making more money, you see. So my point is that using that yield calculation, you can understand which properties perform better. It doesn't tell you how much money you're going to get back and how long it will take you to repay your money. It just tells you which house is performing better than the other. But the last thing to say about this is, when you're choosing yield, this is only if you're only focused on cash flow. Because remember, we talked about capital growth. And actually, if I take an example, over 5 years, I might, in a house that I buy, make £1,000 a month. That's £60,000 of rental profit over 5 years, because 5 years is 60 months. But on that kind of a house, let's say it's worth, £500,000, I would reasonably expect after 5 years that would be worth 600, 650, something like that. So I'd probably be making a lot more than 60 out of the capital growth, maybe 100, maybe 150. Now that's not guaranteed. There's some data you can look at to check that out, but the longer that you hold a property for, the more likely you are to make more money in capital growth, and the more likely you are to make more money, depending on what you've chosen, from the capital growth than from the rent. So after 3 months, you'll have made some money in rent, but probably nothing on capital growth. So in the short term, you're making more money from the cash flow. But in the long term, quite frequently, it's not always the case, but it's possible to be the case, that you can make a substantially larger amount of money from investing with debt in the right way to get that capital growth. And that then becomes interesting and significant and makes you say, hold on a minute, Alan's point about yield would suggest I should find the cheapest place in my case, in the UK, where I invest, although I live in Portugal and I just bought a house here, but I still invest in the UK, find the cheapest place in the UK that has the best yield, right? Isn't that right, Alan? I'd say, well, it depends. Do you want to go for that higher percentage yearly cash flow in a place where prices are so cheap that they're probably not going to keep growing? The chances of them growing fast are probably quite low. So what that means is you're saying, I'm okay with the fact that I might not get much capital growth because it's this kind of an area where if the houses are cheap, clearly the houses haven't grown that much in the past. So the chances of them growing strongly in the future, unless something changes about the area, like some new infrastructure gets put in, you know, it's likely to stay the same. So the past isn't an indicator of the future, a guarantee, but it is a little bit of a pointer. It's an indicator, it's a guide. So my point here is that you wouldn't necessarily just go for the best yield, the cheapest place to buy, because you might want to get some capital growth. So it depends on your strategy. If you're retiring, you might want the cash flow and not be worried about capital growth because your kids are going to get that, but you're not. So you might say, I want to go into the highest yield place. But if you're a younger person like us, you know, I'm in my early 40s, I like to have a good focus on capital growth. So I'm not buying in the cheapest parts of the UK. I'm buying somewhere where there's a balance of, capital growth and cash flow, so that I say, well, look, I could be making more money every month if I invested in that cheaper place, but I'm going to make a little bit less. So I'm going to lose a couple of £100 a month. And that, I consider that an investment, because that investment of losing a couple of £100 a month by being in this better growth area is a bit like paying your entry fee to sit at the poker table of capital growth. I'm losing that couple of hundred for guaranteed, but I know that there's a very good chance that I'll come off better off in the end. So if you're saying, I just want to focus on cash flow, I'm retirement age, I just want an income, then going for the highest yield is probably a good strategy for you. But if you're saying, I'm quite young and I'd like to create a legacy and a pension income and all of that, I don't need the money right now, really. I'm happy to have 800 a month instead of £1,000 a month in cash flow, for example. Then you might say, well, let's lose that £200 a month by being here, where it's not quite so good in the yield, but the capital growth is likely to be much better. And in 10 years' time, I'll probably have made double or triple the money here in capital growth compared to over here, where we were talking where the prices are cheaper. So that's kind of a little bit of a gist of how you can focus your mind on the numbers behind what you're doing, and not just go, I'll buy a house somewhere and that will probably be good and worth some more money in the future. You can surely do that, and people do that all the time. And that doesn't mean you won't be successful. It just means you're leaving a lot to chance.
Mm. Oh, wow. Thank you, Alan, for really, taking us like even a few steps deeper into this material, because I really feel that you've now not only helped the starters here, but also people who are already in here, to help them really maybe even reconsider, or just again consider to think about these different types of strategies, and also allowing yourself to compare this with age, with what type of long-term or short-term thinking would be valuable to really allow yourself to train yourself in. And I just want to repeat some of the books you've set for people that might have forgotten. It is Robert Kiyosaki's first book, but also the Rich Dad Poor Dad book.
Yes.
But also the second one, the Cash Flow Quadrant. And I'd like to add the third one, the Guide to Investing, investing where the rich invest in and the poor do not, something like that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he's got dozens of books, and I've got a load of them on my bookshelf. I was just sharing the two kind of foundational ones that really just helped me to get going, and the rest are all a fantastic part of the educational process, and I just personally found those first two to be extremely useful. One thing I wanted to say at this stage as well is just to be very mindful for all of the listeners on the podcast and the people that are live with us today and so on, is just to be very mindful of people out there in property on Instagram, on social media, who are often selling property investment programs. It's really a great place to get an education often, but you can't always be sure of where the best advice is coming from. And often people try to simplify things to make it great for sales. And property is technical and it's not easy to get into. And if someone tries to tell you some sound bites that are just do this, do that, and then you'll be fine, I don't usually say you must do this. This is the way to get successful in property, because as I gave the example, if you're 65 or close to retirement, what you'll want to do for property is different to somebody who's 40 or 30 who might have a different need or a different plan, but also you might be the same age and one person has a different set of circumstances than the other. So it's really important, to get clear on what you need and what you want, and not just do what some soundbite sounds great to do. So I don't think people listening should just rush out and buy an HMO because I said that you can make more money at it, which you can. You need to really, take the time to kind of decide what's right for you, and that applies to anything that anybody says out there. Look at things, test the things with your mind. Does that sound right for me? What could go wrong with that? You must ask what could go wrong. And the reason I say that is not to be pessimistic, it's to say asking what could go wrong and then making a plan for that is a crucial part of investing, because that minimizes your risk. If you go in too optimistic and say, oh, I'm sure I'll make loads of money, I'll just invest in property, then you open yourselves up to a whole bunch of things that could go wrong. If you say, well, what could go wrong? I'm going to talk to a bunch of people, I'm going to do some research and find out all the stuff that has gone wrong that actually might put me off. That's why people don't want to do it, because they're excited about the money, but they don't want to touch the fear because it might stop them doing it. And I'd say feel the fear and do it anyway. Find those fears out, look at what you can do to overcome those challenges and say, right, that's a genuine risk. How could I minimize the chance that that will happen to me?
Yes, thank you for adding that so much, to really allow yourself to be conscious about your choices, but also the plans for the what ifs, to have your plans in place and to make sure that you care enough for yourself and the ones you to make sure that you have everything set out there and
exactly.
Really, I love that.
Exactly.
And I love to just take care of what type of information do you take in and then how do you act on that. Just be conscious on that. I think that's so
absolutely
great.
And absolutely, you just touched on something else as well, which is important. When I was investing, when I began, I was single. I was unmarried, didn't have children, but I was investing for the wife and kids I didn't yet have. Like I was creating, that was what I was doing for me, you see. But other people might already have wife and kids. They might, have had a wife and kids and now separated, divorced, all different people at different stages in their life. So as I said, it's important just to be mindful of what you're doing and why. And, we talked about sort of health and taking care of yourself, and all of that can be part of this too. It might be the reason you choose to invest in property is because you want to have a feeling of calmness and security, and it's not that you want to make loads of money and go and spend it on stuff. It's just that you want to feel a bit more stable and secure, and that would be a nice feeling to have, and that's okay too. That's looking after yourself in some ways. It might be that you can look after your children's future if you've got children or you want to have children, that says, well, maybe I can do something that by the time they get to a certain age, I can help them with the deposit for a house, which would put them already a big step away from certain challenges that you have without having a property. And obviously you get responsibilities that come with a house. It's on you to fix it. You have to manage your money effectively to make sure that you can afford those things, or insurance policy in place for things that might go wrong. So of course it's not all about, hey, everyone should invest in property, because it's not necessarily right for everyone, and it's also not necessarily right for everyone at every stage in their life. So it's important to understand your own personal investment strategy, and if you don't, it's okay, but it's important to try to understand it, to explore it, and to talk about it with people, and and get help with that. Okay.
Yes, thank you so much for adding that. And for people that now have listened and watched and feel like, hey, I really love this conversation and I feel I'd love to dive into this more, and where can people find you? We'll make sure to put some of some of your information also in the show notes, sure. But we'd like to repeat it here as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking. So, if anyone out there is interested really in investing in property, the people that I work with and the people that I can help the most in terms of what I currently do, really is people that are either in business or that they've come into some money or they've saved some money and they're ready to invest and they already feel like property is probably what they want to do. Okay, so if that's you, then that's the kind of people that I can help best, because I would be saying, look, with your money, you might expect to make X return. I can help you to make a higher return, minimize the risk, both in capital growth terms and in cash flow terms. And not everyone will want to work with me to do that. Some people might prefer to do it themselves and save my fee, let's say. But there are certain subset of people that would say, I just want it done. I want it done quickly. I've got, I might be a busy entrepreneur. I might be, a successful, corporate type. It could be anybody. You don't have to be any of those. You could just be somebody who's saved up enough money or have got inheritance and just want to know what to do with it. So anybody like that wants to invest for the best possible return, whether it be in your own country or in the UK. I specialize in the UK, of course, but I do have property in Brazil, in Portugal, in the UK. So I'm used to looking at a little bit at internationals as well. And actually the numbers are all the same. Wherever you invest in the world, it's always about percentages, and you just change it pounds for euros, dollars for pounds, whatever, it doesn't matter. There are regulatory differences between countries, but my point is if anybody that feels like that's you and that this sort of message is speaking to you, then you can just reach out. My website is alanphill.com, so ALAN P for Patrick and then Hill, alanphill.com. Obviously, if you're on Instagram or Facebook, you can sort of try and reach me there as well. Not that often on social media at the moment, but the website is probably a good way to reach me. And if you want to have a chat about what I could do to help you, that's pretty much it.
That's great. Thank you so much for letting everyone know where to go and where to go. And thank you so much for your time here, Alan, and for sharing all this beautiful knowledge and also the realness. I really enjoyed our talk so much, and thank you everybody here watching and hopping on. Thank you everybody listening for making this world a better place and stepping up and allowing yourself to take good care of yourselves. I'm so happy, going out of this talk with you, jumping into the day. I'd love to ask you, is there any saying or phrase or kind of a motto or things that you live by that you'd like to share as to close the call with?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if we take it back to what we said, when I talked about, losing my mum in the fire and taking in, my house fire, my home burnt down, I lost my mum, and I felt like my life was, just a bit of a mess and just not in a good place at all. And, from there, as I said, I created businesses, several multi-million-pound businesses, created a multi-million-pound property portfolio, became a pilot, went traveling around the world with my wife for 2.5 years. All of these things were dreams. And so what I, always have said is dream the dream and then live the dream. And so what I mean by that is, well, first conceive it in your mind, have a dream, create a dream, find the dream, something that you really want to do, and then find a way to go out and live it. Sometimes it requires a bit of planning, but there's always a way to get what you want. And sometimes you might think, oh, but it's just too much money, I don't have it. Well, you don't have it now, but money comes and goes. As we talked about, there are different things in life that are important, and money comes and goes. So you kind of just have to be aware of that. But doesn't mean that because you've got none now, you won't have none. You'll have none in the future. I came from not really any money. I didn't have any help, parental input in terms of cash or anything into my businesses or properties, and I created that with the help obviously of others. I had teams and so on, but my point is it is possible to create income and wealth for yourself at any stage in your life. And so dream the dream and then live the dream is what I say, and think of something you want to achieve and then just set about thinking about it regularly until you achieve it. So that's one of my own mottos or sayings, but it ties in with the many people talk about the law of attraction. What you focus on expands. You know, you become what you think about, and all of that stuff. It's kind of the same thing, you know. So, but first of all, you've got to create it in your mind. I call that a dream, and then afterwards, you've got to make a plan to achieve it. So, dream the dream, and then live the dream.
Oh, I'm so grateful for you sharing this. Yes, I totally agree on this. I cannot add anything else here. I just thank you for everything, for your time, and everybody here. I'm grateful that you're all stepping up as these beautiful heart-based leaders you are. And thank you again, Alan, so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.